Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I am your host, Rashida Green, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight, whose skin is melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we are breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. So, this episode, as per usual, is sponsored by D&H Vegan Hair Care, available exclusively on Holmes Wholesale's website. And if you are in need of Donnie's good things, I suggest you go over to that website, Holmes Wholesale, and use the code CRP10 and get 10% off of your order. So this episode of the show, we're doing a recap of the legislative session in Maryland. A lot of bills came out towards the end here. It was very interesting, a very interesting finish. It actually concluded on Monday, April 12th, and we're going to talk about it. But before we get there, we're going to give some flowers. The first person I want to give flowers to is Dante Wright. I also want to give flowers to everyone who is grieving right now. In general, a lot of deaths have occurred, a lot of things have happened, and so I'm just giving flowers to the community today. So let's talk about these bills, shall we? So there's a few bills, one in particular that I discussed on this show, I think a couple that I talked about on this show. So we're going to get into some details because, like I said, things ended with quite the bang, okay, in this last little session here. Down in Annapolis, the girls were fighting. So let's go. We have House Bill 670, and I have talked about this before. This is the Police Reform and Accountability Act of 2021. And this is the bill that would repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Okay, so the specifics about this bill, aside from our LEOBR or LOBR, I don't know what people call it, LOBR. Yeah. So aside from LOBR being repealed in this particular bill, there's some other things too. And this had this went through several amendments. So what came out is that police officers would have requirements for how they should conduct themselves at stops, right? And there would be penalties for not following those guidelines. It also provides assistance for police officers who seek, to further their education. It was not, the first go around, it was definitely giving we'll pay for you to go to school. So they kind of dialed that back. Also, it changed the membership of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. And this commission would be responsible for developing training programs and would discipline officers who potentially violate the use of force statute. The next hot ticket is SB 71, the Maryland Police Accountability Act. And this is for body-worn cameras, employee programs, and use of force. This one issued a statewide body cam mandate for officers who routinely interact with the public. So this bill would not be taking effect until October 1st of this year. And there's some language in this bill that calls for, I'm gonna read it because it's important. So it's supposed to establish a confidential and non-punitive, so no retaliation, no punitive action, a early intervention policy, basically a system to identify police officers who are at risk of engaging in the use of excessive force and to provide officers with training, behavioral interventions, reassignments, or other appropriate responses to reduce the risk of the use of force. I just wanted to call that out. So I thought that was very interesting. And last but certainly not least is SB 178, and this is also called the Maryland Police Accountability Act, but this is for search warrants and inspection of records relating to police misconduct. So this bill has actually been called Anton's Law for Anton Black, who was killed in police custody basically under their body weight. And the cause of death was ruled as sudden cardiac death. And under this bill, search warrants have to be requested in writing and submitted for approval. And no-knock search warrants can be requested, but can only be executed from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. And there's also specific details that must be adhered to when the search warrant is issued, like the police officers have to be in uniform, things like that. Now, the Himini hoopla is that over the weekend, well, Larry Hogan vetoed. He said, absolutely, turkey neck ass not. You will not do this. No, right? And he actually wrote a letter, which I'm going to read. I have to read some of this because it's very interesting. Larry Hogan had this to say about these three bills. He says, these bills would undermine the goal that I believe we share of building transparent, accountable, and effective law enforcement institutions, and instead further erode police morale, community relationships, and public confidence. They will result in great damage to police recruitment and retention, posing significant risks to public safety throughout our state. And then he goes into each bill and why he said hell no, right? So for the body camera bill, that's SB 71, he says that this bill would create wholly new and uncharted use of force standard. He also says in his read, he said that the efforts to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights was done in a haphazard fashion. He said instead of a uniform statewide process of police discipline, this bill would create a patchwork of hundreds of locally devised processes. So he's like, no, I'm not having it. And that was fine until the legislators said, well, that's cute, but we're going to get together and get this override going, which they did. So they had the vote on, I think it was on Saturday. And now the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights is being repealed. And this is a big deal. Like, it's a big deal. It's nothing to sneeze at. We'll get into my opinion about this later, because I do have thoughts, of course, you know me. But why is the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights a big deal? Well, in essence, it was a safeguard for police and created to, and I effing quote, guarantee certain procedural safeguards to law enforcement officers during any investigation or interrogation or subsequent hearing that could lead to disciplinary action, demotion, or dismissal. And that's the tweet. It's too long, but you know what I'm saying. This is just, it's okay. And I talked a lot about this in the last season, but we're going to do it again. So just to refresh your memory, the state of Maryland was the first homegirl to pass the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in 1972. And several states followed suit. And efforts for reform, criminal justice reform, yeah, that's been an ongoing battle. If you take a listen back to the lead episode entitled Pumped Full of, I discuss life for lifers, how a young man was incarcerated from the age of 16 and still spending life behind bars, right? So let's keep going. So Maryland is wrought with problems. They're making strides. We're making strides. The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, depending on the state, can also include correctional officers. And if a complaint is filed by someone, the police department can decide, or the office can decide whether to investigate. And if they do, the officer gets notified. There's also a cool-off period. Yeah, where the police officer can just go hang and chill and center themselves and all before the investigation. And the accused officer knows exactly who accused them. And they are interrogated when this interrogation happens. It is done with a union representative present, and none of what they say during the interview can be used against them. So they had to go. But again, there are several states that still have the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights rocking and a-rolling, okay? And believe it or not, we've come to the crossroads. Now, I could go through so many names of men and women who have been murdered by the police. Ones in my own lifetime, ones in the last 2 years, ones that I only read about in books or saw in documentaries, right? And, and I could also remind you all of the origins of the police. And I could also remind you that they are 100% a part of the repressive state apparatus that I talked about in last week's episode. Oh, yeah. But what I really want to do is call attention to the fact that while these bills are going through, or the bills that got through, through the override, they're not strong enough. Not quite strong enough. Certainly steps in the right direction. Certainly not strong enough. I don't think there's anything that should be only symbolic about the Louisville Police Department doing away with no-knock search warrants. I don't think that should just be something symbolic that only means something to that place. I think that's ridiculous. And the fact that, Larry Hogan and a lot of the Republican legislators in Annapolis were really cutting a fool. The amendments, I'm telling you, I've been keeping track of this particular bill, and the amendments were bananas. It's like a loose banana. It's crazy. I'm sorry. That's not fair. All right. Let me fix my bang. I apologize. They're not strong enough is my point. And next, I would like to bring up, because you can tell, hopefully y'all can tell that a word is coming, but spoiler, a word is coming. So I also want to bring in a report written by the badasses over at Job Opportunities Task Force based in Baltimore. And this is an organization, if you guys are looking for someone to support or you want to volunteer, this is a great place to make that possible and to follow them and to support them. So back in 2018, they wrote a report called The Criminalization of Poverty. And like the nerd I am, I really liked this report when it came out, and I've referenced it several times in the past couple of years, and it is still something I go back to just for my reference. And in essence, it outlines the ways in which poverty is criminalized. And the research done in this report came at a time when the Justice Department was investigating the Baltimore City Police Department after the death of Freddie Gray. So according to this report, there are 4 main ways that people of low income or folks living in low income communities are targeted. It's through racial profiling, civil asset forfeiture, so basically taking your shit, motor vehicle laws, and the collection of child support and civil debts. And through these measures, poor people are targeted. And let's get into this. These areas, can you name at least one person either in your life or yourself personally that has had to suffer one of these, either being pulled over, racially profiled and pulled over? Maybe you had a warrant you weren't aware of. They arrest you, they take your car, and you have to pay to get out of jail, and you have to pay to get your shit back, right? Also, child support fees, unless this has changed. And this is back when I think this was referenced in the New Jim Crow, which actually put a pin in the New Jim Crow. So, back when I was reading, I read the New Jim Crow for the first time. I remember child support being part of something that accrued while folks were incarcerated. And I don't know if that's since been stopped. I'd have to do the research and like refresh and see if that's still the case. But just wanted to point that out too, just to kind of slide that on in there. So when we're looking at these bills, like I said, not enough. And it is not to say that there has not been work and attempts at legislation around asset forfeiture. I know that there have been, and as well as racial profiling. Know those things for a fact. However, these are still areas that are detrimental, not just in the state of Maryland, but is a national problem that we have and that we're facing. So honing in on what we need to do in Maryland, this is one of the reasons why I say we have to be as involved as humanly possible in what is going on in our state. You have to be. There's too much stuff going on. So in addition to all of this, quick segue, there's also going to be a massive amount of funding to create and allow the ability for everyone in Maryland to have access to high-speed internet. So there's big stuff going on in the legislative session. That's why you need to pay attention to it. It's like, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. We may or may not be screwed at the federal level, but the state level is where you have everything affects you the most. Okay, back to this. So what I'm talking about, and the reason that I'm talking about this particular report is just to highlight the ways in which poor folks are targeted and unfairly targeted. And as I exemplified, how a lot of those particular targets target Black folk. And again, just to reference, life for lifers in the state of Maryland and what an atrocity that is. And also just to kind of note real quick that this is something that happened to Odell Newton, who I talked about a few episodes back, who was a young man when he committed a crime and is spending life in jail in Maryland right now. And these are the things, like these nuances, these examples that I'm bringing up of the things that we have to work on in the state of Maryland, and also the things that we have to focus on legislatively by state. I bring all this up because this is a great time to also talk about an alternative. And one of the alternative is abolition. Not now. Let me frame this, because I know when we talk about abolition, people get tight, they clench their pearls, and we don't have time for that. Unclench. Whatever is clenched, release. So when we talk about abolition, and I like shout out to the P.D. Green Project, who did a really great abolition panel discussion last week. This is kind of like notes from the virtual field. So they talked about a few things, but one of the things that I really enjoyed that they talked about was to paint a picture of what abolition looks like and what it would entail and how each action, so thinking about the term defunding and how it's being used and how it's splintering people because they don't think the police should be defunded. And then you tack on abolition, which is like, oh my God, but where will all the convicts go? And to clarify, the way I'm starting to think about this is from a few angles. First and foremost, this is not going to be like a rap lyric, like where you just open like all the cells in Attica or whatever. Like that's not what it's going to be. It's got to have a process. It has to have stages. It has to have everything. It has to have infrastructure, which means it has to have funding. Because I want y'all to know, and this is another key thing. This is the importance of getting in and knowing your county or your city or the budget. This is why this shit is important too, because it will give you an idea. So when you think about how much what percentage of a budget the police get, as opposed to education, as opposed to or recreational maintenance and upkeep or green initiatives or whatever else, how much goes to policing, you'd be like, oh, wow. And so that's why I'm saying when we talk about defunding, it's just not like you're taking the money and burning it. You're actually going to reallocate it. That example of the medical health professionals who respond to medical health related calls instead of having the police get called. It's like that. It's making certain that that group, that organization, I apologize, I'm blanking on the name right now because I'm on a roll. It's taking that money and funneling it into that sort of organization or that program so that they can be sustainable, so they don't burn themselves out. 5 people, girl, I don't know how many people there is. I'm just saying, you know how like they like to keep offices all lean, you know, so that people aren't just sitting there bored or whatever they speculate and think about, even though there would be nothing wrong with being a little bored at work. Not like too bored where you're just like, girl, I could just sit here and watch these bootleg cuts of Ayanla. You know, I'm not saying like that type of bored, but I definitely mean like you are not so stressed out that you have bald patches because the work, it is killing you, right? Anyway, I went off on a whole tangent, but getting back to the subject, abolition calls for a major shift in our mindset and our resources to support people at various stages of their transition out of the current police state. And this is just the importance of defunding. But I was initially having some reservations about abolition, and that's why I talk about it, and I talk about it openly, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm just like, I woke up and was like, abolition, and I just always believed it and thought it was, no. I really was like, but girl, what about the criminals who tattoo their eyeballs? Where are they going? You know, I had the same reservations. So I've had to, and I continue to do my research. And that's why I come and I share. So I'm putting it out there. I'm giving little bits, not too much. So it's heavy handed. You know what I'm saying? Just a little bit. Now I'm going to move into a new segment. I'm going to call it a quick word for right now, because that's what I want to roll with. You know, it's Aries season. I'm feeling real hyper, you know, I want to kind of fight a little bit. So a quick word. Turbulence is the price you pay for flying high. I'm pretty confident I got that from like a Sci-Hi the Prince song or something, and that's my business. But the word I have about this is for anyone who has a dream and made the fool-ass decision of sharing it with someone who, you know who it is. This is the type of person that you're like, but what are you doing? So you've made this mistake, here you are, and you're getting a lot of unnecessary feedback or criticism about something that you are trying to work on. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, because that's not my job. My job is just to let you know that if you want to soar and fly high, there will be bumps. You also have to let go. This means that you got to let go of the things that weigh you down, and that means people too. Turbulence is the price you pay. But you keep flying. And that's it, and that's all. Thank you all for joining me. You can follow me on my Patreon. Either become a tier 1 or tier 2 supporter, and that's Crossroads Podcast on patreon.com. Follow me on social media, my Instagram, Crossroads Podcast, Twitter and Facebook, Crossroads Pod C1. You can also go to my website, allroadscross.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you at the crossroads.